We will look at examples, again, all real-life examples, of how we use the economic map to create budgetary scenarios and how we analyze budgetary scenarios. And I'll show you, I think we have here 3 examples of different situations of Israeli NGOs in which the economic map was used and can be used for budgetary scenarios for different decision making. Okay, and then when we finish that, we will move on to full costing and we'll see how we present the budget to external stakeholders, donors, and use the full costing. So this is basically the plan. So the first example, which is a recovery plan, it is a real organization. And before going to the economic map, I want to show you the background to the recovery plan. Now, just to elaborate about the term, a recovery plan is something that I hope you will never encounter. It is a plan that you have to make in emergency cases in which your organization is in a very difficult situation, getting close to be closed or default, and you create a plan in order to save the organization. So hopefully you will learn how to avoid these situations, but sometimes it is necessary. Sometimes it's not up to you. It's external conditions and there is nothing you can do. Here in this organization, what we see, this analysis was done in 2011, June or July, I don't remember. And this is the background that led to the necessity to do a recovery plan. So first of all, what we see is a reduction in income. It always starts with reduction in income. Okay, what to do? So the organization experienced a reduction in income, gradual, and you can see it's not linear. For example, between 2009 and 2010, there was a small increase in income, but overall, you can see the trend of income going down from 4.1 million shekels in 2008 to 3.1 million or 3.2 million shekels in 2011. So that's almost a million shekels reduction. Now in terms of proportion, okay, from 4 million to 3 million, it's 25%. It's very significant. Okay, again, a reduction of income of 1 million in organization that has a budget of 50 million is less significant than in a small organization. Okay, so this is the income. Now, this is the deficit, income minus expenses. And here is the point of why it needed a recovery plan. When we have a reduction in income, then the thing that you would expect that happen is that there will be an equivalent reduction in expenses. Okay, I mean, this is what you'll do in your personal life, right? If you have less income, you probably spend less. But here we can see that it didn't happen. What happened was that in 2008, with the 4.1 million income, the organization had a deficit of almost 300,000. Meaning that its expenses exceeded its income, even in the early period in which income was relatively high, by 300,000. And we can see that each year there was a deficit. Okay? So the organization overspent at least over 4 years. I presented here 4 years, but they may have overspent even before that. That creates an accumulated deficit. Now, there is a question, how can an NGO absorb accumulated deficit? So we will see that later on when we talk about financial statement. right now we'll take it as a given, but there is a certain point in time in which the organization cannot absorb any more accumulated deficit. Again, think of your personal life. Let's say that you have, the bank allows you to overspend, okay, to be in, they open a credit line for you, so you can have expenses more than your income, but it's limited. When you reach the limit, that's it. So the organization basically met its limit, and it could not overspend, and it had to create a recovery plan. Now, when you create, the reason that recovery plan is, I would say, painful, is that when you create a recovery, when you are in a situation like that, it's not enough that you balance your budget. You have to create surpluses to cover the history, all the sins of the past, okay? All the accumulated deficit that you had in the past, you have to start covering them, maybe not in 1 year, but gradually. So this was the situation in this organization, and as it says here, in July 2011, the NPO prepared a recovery plan. Now, again, let's look at timelines. When we are in mid-year, okay, then our ability to decrease cost or decrease expenses for this year is very limited because half of the year was already spent. We can only plan for the second half, and even that is not immediate because planning for cutting expenses is mainly dismissing staff. But you can't dismiss, at least here in Israel, you can't dismiss staff from today to tomorrow. In the United States, it's more brutal. You can tell somebody you are fired. Here in Israel, it's not that. There are more social laws here, like in Europe, and you have to you have to have a hearing, and then you have to give a 1 month notification, and so it takes some time. So basically, the idea was to start a recovery plan, but the full effect of the recovery plan will only be seen in 2012. Okay, so the organization prepared a budget for 2012 with the recovery plan, and in order to see that, we will go to our Excel file. Now we are still in the worksheet economic map, and we are here. Example number 2. Okay. Okay. So example number 2, the first table always is the base scenario. Make it slightly larger. So this is the base scenario, and the base scenario reflects an updated budget for 2011. Note that it says updated in July 2011. And that is something, again, hopefully we'll have time to get back to that, but the budget has to be updated. The budget that was planned for 2011 most probably was different from this budget because there were additional data that were added in the first half of the year. Actual income for 6 months, pledges that now the organization realized that will not materialize. So this is an updated budget. Now, this is an economic map, but now it is presented in a transposed manner so that we will avoid fixation. Okay, so it's not imperative that programs will appear horizontally and income and expenses vertically. You can do it also transpose programs vertically and income and expenses horizontally. Okay, it doesn't matter. It's an issue of convenience. So here we see the programs on the vertical column. Now, we also see here only income and expenses. We don't see the breakdown of income and expenses because for the purpose of this analysis, it's not important. what we want to see is the base scenario and the new scenario, and to analyze the differences. So it's not very important for this analysis, the breakdown. So we see only total income and total expenses. And one last thing, which is again important, it's technical, but if you don't get it right, you'll make mistakes. The sign. So income appears with a positive sign, but expenses here appears with a negative sign. Now, in the other example, expenses appear in positive sign. So let's see the other example here, income and expenses with a positive sign. So why the difference? Again, the difference is in order for you not to be fixated. So let me explain. In the accounting system, which records income and expenses and income will not appear in the same sign. If any of you ever seen an accounting system, there are credit and debit. Credit is plus, debit is minus, same as in your bank account. If you look at your bank account, you will see these columns, credit, debit, and balance. Okay, so if you have income, it will appear as credit, but today in modern banking system, it will appear in green, and debit will appear in red, like here, expense. Okay, because income and expenses basically have opposite signs. One comes in, one goes out. Okay, so here expenses are presented with a negative signs, like in the accounting system. However, in the previous example and also in your exercise, we presented them with a positive sign, which is the common way to present expenses. So it can be either like that or like that. Again, up to you. But I want you to be aware of the two methods. Now, the difference is that if we present expenses like here with a positive sign, then the economic contribution will be income minus expenses. But if we present expenses with a negative sign, the economic contribution will be income plus expenses with a minus sign. Okay? It's technical, but we have to understand it if we want to use the negative. There are some advantages to the negative sign that we will see later on. All right, so this is clear? Okay, so what do we see here? First of all, let's look at the program. So this organization is kind of an advocacy community organization, and it worked in spite of its small size. You can see that it had kind of a large, at least in Israeli terms, a large geographical span, because it had programs in the south, in Jerusalem, in the center. It has also a specific program for Bedouins. And the programs basically are divided geographically and also programmatically. So it has three main programs: advocacy, community programs, and co-op. Co-op is kind of an arrangement that people can buy food products at cost. So all the staff in the kind of supermarket or mini market are volunteers, and the organization probably get the place also for free. So poor people can buy a food product just at cost without maybe a small margin to cover operational expenses. And besides that, it had also a legal department. Advocacy always have a legal department. Again, something that, since it is mentioned here, I'll explain. Usually we refer legal expenses to general management, but in advocacies that advance laws that help people in appealing to the courts for all kind of social injustice, they have a legal department which is part of the program. Okay, like I used to be a volunteer in the board of directors of the Israeli Council for Children, And there was a large legal department that promoted laws for the protection of children, that appealed to courts when there were cases that related to children. So the legal department is also a program, and there are the infrastructure and general management. Okay? Now, what we see here is that we have income. Certain programs, they don't have income at all. And that is, again, something that we haven't seen yet, but it is can be common in nonprofits, that you have programs that are important for the organization, for its social goals, and there is no income. It's only to be raised section. The organization wants to raise an income to them, but didn't succeed yet, but they are still in place. Okay? And there is also this program, which has no expenses because basically it was closed already in 2011, and there is kind of a residual income from, I don't know, from the previous period, which is left. Okay, so this is again the difference between real data and synthetic data. So real data are always like a little bit dirty. They are not clear cut. There are things that are kind of gray. So this is an example of that. And we have the economic contribution. Okay, and we can see that part of the programs have a positive economic contribution, part of the programs have negative economic contribution, but the overall is that the organization had still a planned deficit in 2011, which it wanted to eliminate. We also see that there is a quite significant, again, in the perspective of this organization, significant undesignated donation, which is recorded here. Infrastructure and general management, 518,000 shekels is undesignated donation, or donations, could be several. Okay, so are we clear until now? This is the base scenario. Now, the organization now created a budget. Now, for the budget, the first thing that needs to be done is to create an income forecast. But in July 2011, data for more accurate income forecast did not exist. Again, it's an issue of timetable. Usually, you can start projecting your future income in the second half of the year. Towards September, October, you have more information, what will be your income in the next year. Here, the director who did this recovery plan with my assistance did not have any projections. So she used the income for 2011 as a base for 2012. Basically, she assumed that she will have the same income structure. Okay, that was her base assumption. So the recovery plan is reflected only in the expenses. So this is the variable that we control is the expenses. We don't control the income. I mean, we can invest a lot of efforts in raising income, but we don't control it. But we have control over our expenses. We can decide how many people we are going to employ, what we are going to buy, etc. What programs we want to continue, what programs we want to discontinue. Okay, so we have the new expenses after the recovery plan. And we can see that if we look at the column, bottom line here, we can see that in 2012, there was a plan for a small surplus. Maybe not large enough, but a small surplus. Now, we want to analyze the recovery plan and to understand what happened. Based on these numbers, it's very difficult to see. I mean, the numbers here are different from the numbers there, but we don't see explicitly what is the difference. So in order to do that, we add another component to our economic map, and these are these three columns, which reflect the changes. Okay, and as you can see, there are three columns: change in contribution, change in income, and change in expenses. So using these three columns, we can see what actually happened in the organization. So how do we create these columns? So let's start in the column change in contribution. So change is basically, if you remember from our previous course, last divided by first minus 1. Here it's simpler, last minus previous, okay? The future scenario minus the base scenario. Let's see it. Here we have a positive change in contribution of almost 82,000. It is the result of the following formula. The contribution in 2012 minus the contribution in 2011. So we take the current or the contribution in the scenario that we want to analyze, and we subtract from it the contribution from the base scenario, which is the present. Okay, future minus present. Now, as you can see, the contribution in 2012 is still negative in this program, Advocacy South, but it is less negative than the contribution in the base scenario. So there is kind of a reduction in the negative contribution from 204,000 minus to minus 122. And that reflects an improvement in the contribution by 82,000 shekels. Okay? So is this clear? Let's see the other one. So here we can see that there is no change. Okay? So here there is no change in the expenses. Again, here all the changes are in the expenses because income was assumed from the beginning to be equal between the two scenarios. So what we see here, and here is the verbal description, that there is a decrease in the expenses. So there is still a negative economic contribution, but it is smaller. Now, if we go to the next change, we can see that here we have a negative economic contribution. Here we have zero economic contribution. Here we had a negative economic contribution. And basically there is a net change of 46,000, which what we see here in this program, Community South, go here to Community South. There was no income for this program in 2011. They had expenses, and the director decided to close it. If the program is closed, there's no income, but all the expenses are saved. So the effect on the economic contribution is 46,000 with a plus sign. Okay? Is this clear?
Yes.
Okay. And so the program was closed. Here, let's see what happened here in the community Jerusalem. So again, there is a positive effect on the economic contribution. So what we see here is that this program again was with no income. There were expenses of 65,000, and it was reduced significantly to 24. So like 1/3, 2/3 of the program were basically closed, and that created a positive change of 40,000, significant decrease in expenses. Now here is the community programs in the center. Again, we can see that there is a positive effect on the economic contribution because expenses were again significantly decreased for 113 to 60,000. Here we have a little bit of an issue because we have income to this program. And when we have people give money to a certain program and suddenly you decrease it, you have to explain it. So I don't know how the director was going to explain that, but this unlike the previous example in which I have no income, so I'm free to do whatever I think is good for the organization, when I have income, I have certain obligations to my donors who gave the money for this program, and I have to give some kind of an explanation. So I don't know what the explanation was, but the end result was a significant decrease in the expenses. And these are basically the changes in the contribution. Now, the column change in contribution can be the results of either change in income or change in expenses or both. Okay, here in this example, which is a simpler example, the only source of changes is the expenses side, because we assumed that income will be the same as in the previous year. In the next example, we will release this assumption. We will look at a more complicated situation. So the only source of change was in expenses, and therefore you can see that the changes due to expenses are exactly equal to the changes in the contribution. Okay? Now let's look a little bit about the technical issue, which can be a little bit confusing. So in terms of income, it's straightforward. When I want to see the change in income, I take the current income and I subtract from it the previous income. Okay, the same number, it will be 0, but this is the technique. Current minus previous. Now, in expenses, okay, and this is the thing that can be a little bit confusing. What do we see here? Basically, we see here the same formula. So we had expenses of 326,000. Now we have expenses of 244, almost 45. So if we do minus 245 minus 326, we get a positive effect of almost 82,000. But what will happen if I use a positive sign for the expenses? What will happen then? Then I get the same number, but with a negative sign. And this is the thing that you have to remember. And I'll say it and say it again. When you use a negative sign for the expenses, the sign of the change reflects positive or negative effect on the contribution. Okay, so here 82,000 is saving. It appears with a positive sign because saving have a positive effect on the organization. Okay, but if you use expenses with a positive signs, like you will do that in your exercise, so you can practice that. The sign here will be negative, but you have to remember that here the negative sign means that it is less expenses. So it is a negative sign, but it is a positive effect. Okay? That is the reason why using negative signs for expenses, it basically creates a clearer picture. If you use a positive sign for expenses, which is the common method, then you have to remember in the back of your mind that the negative sign of the change due to expenses means less expenses, but less expenses has a positive economic effect on the organization. Okay, I hope this is clear, but you will practice it, so practice will make it clearer. All right.
Can I ask a question?
Of course.
Unless you're gonna going about something, maybe.
No, go ahead, ask.
How come they didn't just close the co-op in Jerusalem instead of closing just community center, which didn't have much effect? So
that's exactly the next topic. What actually we see here in this budgetary analysis, we see numbers, we see here some verbal explanation of what happened. But what do we see here? So let's look again, from Michelle, from your perspective. What we see here is that, first of all, there is kind of, you can say, something that is not clear in the decision what to close and what not to close. For example, the advocacy in the South has a very large negative economic contribution, but they didn't close it. I mean, they could have closed it and maybe save the organization with a saving of 244, but they didn't. They decreased the expenses, but they didn't close it. Also, if you look at the legal, which also has a significant amount of expenses, they didn't change it. Here in the advocacy center, which is significant in terms of expenses, they didn't change it. Now, all the co-ops, as you can see, have a positive economic contribution. So obviously we understand why they didn't touch the co-ops. A positive economic contribution, there is no reason to touch them or close them. But they focused on the community, and the director decided to close or discontinue or decrease the community center, and she almost didn't touch the advocacy, in spite of the fact that the advocacy in a way contributes to the deficit much more. And that exactly is the interaction between economic and social goals. Because what this director told me, she said, if I have to decrease or close my advocacy programs, I might as well close the organization. This is the core of the organization, the heart of the organization, according to her perception, obviously, are the advocacy programs. So I want to leave them the way they are or decrease them in the minimal way. Now, as for the community programs, her words, not mine, I can live without them. I can close them, I can discontinue them. They were less important to her in the scale of the social goals. And this exactly is the interaction. When we have to create a recovery plan, then prioritization becomes the most important issue. What is the most important from the social point of view? These are the programs that I want to leave. And what are the programs that I'm not saying that they are not important, but they are less important, and I'm willing to close. And remember, this is something I always tell my children. When you have choices in life, it is almost, I would say, never the case that you can choose between a good option and a bad option. Usually you have to choose between a bad option and a worse option. These are the choices that you usually have to do in life. You have to look at your options and ask yourself, which is the least bad option that I can live with? Okay, what to do? It is always the case in my courses in this program that usually you get a lot of enthusiasm and vision, etc. And I talk about the opposite side. But unfortunately, life has two sides. Well, life has two sides, and and you can't imagine that you always encounter the bright side. Sometimes you have to encounter the less bright side, and you have to know how to handle your organization in order to save it. So these were the decisions that were made at the time, and the economic map, especially this table of changes, reflects the priorities of the director of this organization. Okay? So that, I guess, answered your question, right?
Yeah, but still, in a way, they didn't have so much income contribution, the community thing, so it didn't help really to close them.
It's
so
true.
She had reduced one advocacy, not all of them.
It's true.
Then maybe she could have continued.
It's true. I mean, maybe if you were in her shoes, you would decide differently, but these were her decisions. I can only describe what happened and the reasons that she gave me at the time.
Well, to see the holistic of the South advocacy community and co-op, the south is not bringing that much, so you can at least minimize the leak, let's say. So that's why when she closes a community in south, it helps a little bit.
Yeah, but that's a program with no income.
Yeah,
but then
exactly.
we need more advocacy because they
No,
close the
but as he said, the advocacy is a core business.
That was a core issue for her.
So at least keep the core business and reduce the.
Right. So look, first of all, I want to show you two things. First of all, unfortunately here, the end result is not very positive. As you can see, at the end of 2014, this organization was closed. So the recovery plan didn't work for a long time. It worked for 1 or 2 years. And the reason is probably that it came to life too late. And if the recovery plan was done, let's say 3 years before.
Sorry, I'm not able to make a phone call at this time, but you can ask me to place a FaceTime call.
Okay.
Just click on this.
Who are we calling, Ahmed?
No, it's from your voice. I did not say.
From mine? Wow. Okay. All right. So the end result here is that the organization was closed. The recovery plan, again, that's something that a lesson for life, since I've been involved in several recovery plans, some of them more successful and some of them less successful. The earlier that you start, the better are your chances to succeed. The thing is that a recovery plan requires a reduction in activity. And this is something which is very painful for NGOs. Again, it's a unique characteristic of NGO. In the business sector, if you have a line of product which is not profitable, you close it. There is no emotional attachment, okay? If you have services that are not profitable, you discontinue and you try something else. But in the non-profit sector, you have programs that benefit people. When you close them, there is an effect on the people that receive your program, your services. Here in this example, the community programs serve communities. You close them, you stop serving the communities. There is a lot of emotional attachment, okay? So it is very painful to do these steps. But then on the other hand, the more you stall, the more you wait, the less are your chances to succeed. So it requires a significant amount of discipline and being focused on what your responsibility as directors of organization, and that is to keep your organization alive, to save it if the circumstances are that you cannot continue in the same level of activity. Now, what also I want to show you, that if we go back to the Excel, is what actually happened. I mean, here we see budget for 2011. Remember that this is a budget which is updated in July, but still the second half of the year is projection. And we can see a budget for 2012. And here, based on the financial statement of the organization, we can see what actually happened. So these are the actual data from the financial statements of the organization. And here in the light blue column, we can see the difference from the plan. And again, there are lessons to be learned here too. So first of all, let's look about 2011. Income was 3.26 million. And again, the comparison is, here I compare the income to the budget. So actual income for 2011 is compared to planned income for 2011. And we can see that income was slightly higher than predicted. Okay? We predicted for 2011 an income of 3.2, and we actually had 3.264. Okay, and that is again the difference in the time framework. We did the prediction in July. The end of the year, apparently we receive a little bit more. However, expenses also exceeded the budget, not by much. So we had expenses of 3.34 while we predicted 3.386. It's not, my mistake. Expenses were less than the prediction. See, I was confused again by my signs. If expenses are with a negative sign, then a positive number here means that there was a saving. I now made the same mistake that I warned you against. What we see here is two positive effects. The first is that we had more income eventually at the end of 2011 than we predicted. And also we had less expenses. The positive sign here means that expenses were slightly lower than the expectation. Okay. Now, there is another item here which was somehow absorbed in the numbers, and I'll explain it. These data here are taken from financial statements, and in financial statements, we show separately expenses on operations and expenses on fixed assets, investment like computers, furniture, etc. So we'll talk about that later on. In the budget, these expenses sometimes are kind of hidden in the operational expenses. It's not a very good way to present the budget. It's best to present the budget also with a separation of investment separately and operational expenses separately, but here it wasn't done. So
are we going to read financial statements?
Yes, but not today. Later on. So all these expenses were not presented at all in the budget. So what we see here, these expenses, and they contributed with a kind of a negative effect because they were not in the planning, but they were actually spent. But the bottom line was that we had a planned budget for 2011 of 186, but an actual budget of 93,000. So the bottom line was that 2011, the results were better than the expectation, which is a good thing. It means that the director, when she planned the effect of the recovery plan on 2011, she probably underestimated the effect, and the effect was higher than she thought. So we had a positive results, better than what we anticipated. Now, if we go to 2012, and here we can see a very dramatic change. So let's look at income first. The actual income, remember that we assumed when we did the analysis that in 2012 we have the same income as in 2011. That was a working assumption. We didn't know, so we assumed that. Actual income was lower by 500,000 shekel. Probably, I would say that's another, you can say the straw that broke the neck of the camel, or the back of the camel. Right, because you are in a bad situation, you create a recovery plan, and then you have another reduction in income, very significant. It is very difficult to survive in these conditions. So income was reduced by 500,000 compared to the expectation. We can see also a dramatic decrease in expenses. So the recovery plan planned for expenses of 3.2. Actual expenses were 2.6. So the sign is obviously positive. It's a saving. There was a cost saving compared to the expenses that were after the recovery plan, after the saving that was created here, the 222 that was created compared to 2012, there was additional 500,000, which means basically that we don't see the breakdown of the programs in 2012, but probably she had to close some of the advocacy, or maybe all of them or part of them. There's no way she was able to reduce 500,000 shekels without closing this program. So probably 2012 was kind of when the organization, when the Guide Star says that the organization was closed in 2014, that is the official closure. But probably the actual closure was even earlier, given these results. The bottom line was that there was a positive surplus, which was even larger than the plan, but that was not enough. I don't know if she decided to close the organization due to economic reason, the accumulated deficit, or due to the fact that she was unable to continue the programs as she wanted, or maybe due to both. That's possible. But this is what we can see when we compare the actual results to the planned budget. And again, if we go to our PDF, so the unfortunate end was that the organization was closed.